Hi, my name is Sean Shapiro, and this is not the first, but the second TIRF TiPS. That's a partnership between the Toronto Police and the Traffic Injury Research Foundation. We're getting together to talk about different topics that relate to traffic safety, because that's kind of our thing. So joining me today, we have Robin Robertson from TIRF. And good morning, welcome back.
Hey, always happy to be here. We have some great conversations about a whole bunch of different things. So yeah, another interesting topic today.
Yeah, and the topic that we're going to discuss is really the trend that's been alleged that young people are waiting longer to get their license. So we want to delve into why that might be happening. Is it actually happening? And is it negatively impacting driving safety? So let's talk about it. Where do we start?
Okay, so to answer the question, yes, young people are delaying licensing. Unlike, for our generation, when it was a rite of passage, you're 16, you get your license ASAP. That's not happening today, and it's not happening for a couple of different reasons. One, the driving has become a more complex task. We have a lot of issues like distraction and fatigue and stunt driving and drug impairment that we didn't really talk about 30 years ago. The vehicles have become much more complex. There's a lot of peer pressure that teens deal with when they have their license and their friends want to be passengers in the vehicle. And then, of course, we have a number of programs and policies around young drivers gaining driving experience in a low-risk, safe environment. So between driver education and graduated driver licensing, it's not a quick thing to get your license anymore. So, but we are seeing that in Canada as well as the US, those delays.
It's a big process because now you have to get your learner's permit. You need to spend a minimum of 8 months if you've got a approved driving course. Otherwise, it's 12 months before you can even apply to get your G2, which then allows you to drive on your own without a supervisor. And then you have to do at least 12 months driving with a G2 before you can apply for a G. And then, of course, we had all sorts of people delayed because of COVID and whatnot. So it's a different process because when I got mine, it was a 365. I had it the day I turned 16. And about 30 days later, I was a fully licensed G driver.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, I didn't get my license till I was 18, but that's only because I had an older brother and sister. So I wasn't going to get the car until they left home anyway. But yeah, there was no GDL. And my generation was probably one of the last ones before GDL. We kind of slipped in under the wire. But today there's just a lot more process, and the recognition of how practice driving in low risk environments can really reduce crashes among young people is really the premise around those longer periods to get your learners, to get your intermediate G2 license. And then for some jurisdictions, they even have an advanced exit test.
Oh, wow.
So yet another layer.
It's interesting because the idea is to get you more experience. And for someone who has the family support and access to a vehicle and a licensed driver, this is potentially a really good system. And for people who don't have access, nobody else in their family drives, or they don't have a car at their disposal, it does pose some challenges, because I hear from our viewers all the time that, what do you do? I can't afford to have a driving instructor for all of my experience. So it does add another layer of complication.
Right. And that's actually one of the reasons that driver education programs are not mandatory. It's really important that people from all walks of life are able to gain a license, and the requirement of driver education shouldn't necessarily be a barrier, but it does create that additional concern about, how are they learning to drive and what kind of practice are they getting, and is it ultimately going to contribute to them being a safer driver?
Now, having that extra experience is supposed to give you experience. You're supposed to have more confidence behind the wheel because you've just been doing it longer before you're left to do it on your own. Do you think it works?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The research shows that the more practice hours that teens get, the safer drivers they are. So in North America, it's often 30 hours, but in other jurisdictions, it's more often 50 hours, and in some jurisdictions in Australia, it's even 120 hours. And that's, when you think about 30 hours, that's not a lot of driving when you consider the different types of roadways that exist, when you think about the different traffic signals and mechanisms on the road, and then when you think about the seasons we have. So it's important that that practice experience covers kind of the gamut of what young drivers might encounter on the road.
Now, what about people who choose, because we're talking about the concept of not getting your license when you turn 16 and waiting longer. Is it something that is the same when you wait 2 years, 4 years, 8 years? Are you going through the experiences the same way, or do you bring something different to the table? Is it better or worse?
Well, waiting isn't a bad thing. The biggest contributors to risk for young drivers are their age and inexperience. So obviously, the older they are, the less age is a factor, and they have more life experience, more maturity, more understanding of risk to foresee things that can happen. So as you age, your impulsivity becomes a little bit less, at least for many of us, and that reduction in impulsivity, which translates into risk taking as you age, is a benefit.
Well, and here's something to play devil's advocate. Does reducing your risk-taking ability increase the anxiety or the potential that you may not be as as a good position to sort of jump into this learning? Because learning to drive can be stressful, and if you have stressors because you now know the realities of life, you may be more hesitant.
Right. And I mean, that's why driver education is so important, and the graduated driver licensing system, because it does help teens gain experience in low risk settings and gain the confidence they need. If you are a nervous driver, if you feel anxiety every time you're behind the wheel, the odds are you're more likely to be crash involved, because it's that indecision, right? That moment of indecision, that moment of hesitation, which can lead to bad things.
So there's really a balance, because when you have the person that thinks they cannot do any wrong, and they're confident because they don't have that concern that may come with age, they're willing to get out there and do things, and they get some great experience. And on the other side, someone who waits a little longer might develop some phobias or some concerns, and so you have to find that happy balance in the middle where you
Yeah.
you don't.
And honestly, one of the reasons that young people really are more reluctant to go out and get licensed right away is there is a lot of peer pressure at that age. I mean, we thought we had peer pressure when we were in high school, but we didn't have the internet to contend with. We didn't have our every action and thought memorialized for posterity. So for young people, there simply is a lot more pressure. And when you're in the car, to drive faster, to drive distracted. And it can be hard at any age, but particularly for young people to say, no, I'm not doing those things. And that's one of the things that we do need to encourage young drivers to do, is to know that they are in charge of the vehicle, and it's their responsibility to ensure that they're able to drive safely. And if that means telling your friends to, sit down, shut up, and put your seatbelt on, that's what it means.
You bring up all the factors about the peer pressures and whatnot, but one of the biggest barriers, I think, to driving today is it's expensive. And I know that especially in urban areas, or in city areas, it's it's very easy to get around without a vehicle. We have so many different opportunities to use the transit, and having everything so close by. People like my wife, for instance, didn't need to drive. But when you get into the urban sprawl, there's different necessities.
Yeah, and I mean, absolutely. I grew up in Northern Ontario in Wawa, so if you didn't have your license, you weren't going anywhere. Um, but yeah, younger people today definitely have more options and more ability to stay connected to their friends without being physically present. So that does allow them to be engaged in social life without necessarily having to be, in the group physically with some of their friends.
It's funny. I recently spoke to a friend who is a producer of a morning show that I guest on, and he's obviously an adult male. He's been living in the city forever. He just got his G1. And
Yeah.
that was a big thing. We actually did a little quiz on the radio to see if he would pass the G1. I haven't yet had any feedback if he did pass or not. But yeah, so everything is different. Everything is different. In terms of, you know, why would you, or let me ask you this way. Would you encourage someone to wait, or would you encourage someone to get in there and get moving?
I think young people need to wait till they feel ready to drive. Driving before you have the confidence or the maturity with respect to understanding risk taking and the profound effects of it. It can be better to wait. I think there isn't really a magic age. I think at a minimum 16 should be when people can get their learners.
And some
But
provinces do allow earlier, but generally speaking, 16 seems to be the standard across Canada.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few Western provinces and certainly some states in the U.S. where they can get a beginners as early as 14, but there's a lot of pressure on both sides to permit it because they're largely kids in rural farming areas driving farm equipment. But at the same time, there's the risk factor, right? If age and inexperience are factors, that's even truer at 14 than it is at 16. But I think kids need to feel ready and able for the responsibility of driving.
And I like what you said, that it's something that you have to be able to judge and feel. I know that at 16, I thought I was ready. I had made the commitment at 15 to go and take my in-class so that there was nothing holding me back the day that I turned 16 from moving forward. And I took every opportunity to drive. But if you get the license, the learner's permit, and do nothing with it for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and it's just a piece of paper, you're not getting any benefit. So it's best to start when you have a plan to continue and complete. And especially if there's a need. I talk about the fact that you have to be a fully licensed G-class driver to be able to apply for a job with the Toronto Police. You have to, for a uniform role. And if you wake up at 20 years old and determine you want to be a cop, well, now you have 2 years of waiting minimum before you can apply, and even then you don't have that experience. So, you have to sort of look at your future and your plans and what your wants to make an educated decision as to how you want to go forward. But it's I think I agree 100% that it's based on how you feel. If you don't want to drive, there's no reason you should drive. And if driving scares you, then that's even a better reason not to be a driver.
Yeah. And I think parents play an important role in helping their teens become confident and know when they're ready by talking to them about it. And even before they're old enough to get their beginners and to start driving, to talk to them about what it means to drive and what the responsibility is of driving. And certainly the more time parents spend in the vehicle with their teen as they're learning to drive, the more likely they are going to have a driver who's confident and who's comfortable in a variety of road situations, because we all know every day you go out on the road, it can be a whole new experience. And it's important that parents support young drivers and give them the experience going through construction zones and bad weather and heavy traffic and roundabouts and large intersections with multiple signals and multiple lanes. They need all of it, and parents are important to help them get it.
We've talked about this in previous episodes when you've been on the TPS Traffic Jam, and it's that really we have to set up our kids early, because when they don't start learning when they take a course, they start learning when they watch you drive. They are sponges absorbing all sorts of behavioral information. And if you are on your phone, you're teaching them that it's okay. If you are distracted speeding or aggressively driving, you are teaching that trait well before their driving age. So I don't want to blame the kids. I want to talk to the parents about having a strategy to be good role models. And that's something that I don't think we talk about nearly enough.
Absolutely. I mean, kids are smart. They pay attention, and when they see their parents doing things in the car, then that is tacit approval for those behaviors. So they don't really think it's risky, or even understand the difference between a parent doing something with their phone in a very low risk, low traffic environment versus doing it in the middle of an intersection as they're in the middle of a left-hand turn. So talking your kids through, and I know Karen does this a lot with her children as they were getting older and learning to drive, to talk about why you make the choices you make on the road, and then modeling those good behaviors. And there are no exceptions, right? It's you're on all the time.
And I can tell you, and I've probably told you this before, my little one will remind me the moment that GPS says that I am going above the posted speed limit. It doesn't matter if it's for the split second, she is on it, and I have been told off more than once. And it's not that I'm speeding aggressively, that I've passed it by any amount, because speeding is any amount over the speed limit. But she's on me and to tell me to slow down, unless she's focused on her telephone, and that's a different story.
Unless she's distracted.
Unless she's distracted, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, we've covered a bunch of things. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
Really, I think just the importance of driving. Having the ability to drive opens so many doors in terms of employment, in terms of education, in terms of life experiences. Essentially, young people have more tools and skills at their disposal and access to more opportunities when they learn to drive. So I think it's important for every generation of drivers to seriously consider getting their driver license at some point, particularly if they're not committed to spending their life in a convenient location serviced by public transportation.
And acknowledging that it's incredibly expensive, and it may not be the right decision for some people. I know that if I had an extra $1,000 to $1,500 a month by not having to have a vehicle, that I could probably have a lot of fun, whether it be a nicer house, more vacations or whatnot. So it's a trade-off. And with many employers trying to make life easier for their people, bringing them, working close to where you live or whatever the answer. There's other ways of doing it, but it is setting yourself up for a particular path. And once you're down it, it's hard to undo it. Again, my wife not being a driver, how do you do certain things? Well, you rely on either the infrastructure or somebody else. And fortunately, it works out well because I drive. But I've been driving again since I was 16, and I not only drove cars but motorcycles. And I wouldn't have become a motor officer had I not been driving or riding a motorcycle since I was 16. My choices have set me up for success and got me into everything I wanted to do. Had I not had those, I wouldn't be here, and we'd be, listening to not the TikTok traffic cop, but something else. And so it's worked out for me. I'm not trying to say that it's for everybody, but it's something that you have to look at from a wide angle lens and holistically, approach it. Because if you do have plans, you want to get on those, because you can't create experience without experience. You have to take those steps. And
driving is a lifetime skill, right? For those of us who learn to drive, you're driving for 60 years. So it's important to learn safely. It's important to learn good habits from the get-go. But it does influence the trajectory of your life in some instances, unless you're fortunate enough to be in a, urban area well serviced by public transportation, which for a lot of Canada and the US is not the case.
Well, so I think that this episode, and I really want to draw attention to the fact that we're not telling you have to get your license, and the people who want their license and live in urban areas or in areas that have less infrastructure and support by transit systems and whatnot, you've already likely made the decision to drive. And it's really, I think, a problem for city centers where people have so many options at their disposal that the need isn't there. But life changes and sometimes shifts. And when we talk about new drivers, because insurance rates are higher for new drivers, that could be at any age. I really want to stay away from pointing the finger at young people and saying you're the problem, because you're not necessarily. And everybody who is out on the road is making their own decisions. There's some very responsible, young people. There's some very irresponsible older people. And I probably should have started with this 20 minutes ago, because we tend to be in a position where we give the impression that young people are the problem. Are they the problem?
It depends on what problem, right? So young drivers have a high crash risk. They represent 16% of fatal crashes, but only 11% of the population. So they are overrepresented, and the reasons for that are well known. But they are not the only drivers out there making poor choices. Some of them, you have some young drivers who are much better and much safer than many adult drivers. And when you look at things like alcohol, when you look at things like seatbelt use, young drivers actually are more likely to wear their seatbelt and less likely to use alcohol. And older drivers, it's the young adults, middle age, who are more crash involved. But then when you look at like distraction, or you look at speeding, yeah, we tend to see more young drivers. So it really depends on what kind of issue, what type of road safety issue you're talking about. But young drivers are part of the problem, but they are definitely not the whole problem. There are a lot of adult drivers who also make poor choices. And maybe it's some of those teens that we see now making poor choices because they watch their parents do same.
So we get to blame our parents. We get to suggest that training is a really good way to go if you can afford it, if you can do it. Now, I say professional instructors are the way to go, but if you can't get one, or if money to spend on that just isn't in the budget and money is tight, finding a responsible, good example is far better than finding someone who says yes to teaching you to drive. There's got to be another responsible person in your life, and if you haven't found them yet, find one. Because finding someone who's not a good driver or has lots of habits to impart onto you is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely, it is.
Too much. Well, listen, we could go on forever on this. I think we've covered everything we set out to. And if there's questions coming from this, please, for the viewers watching this, we're on whatever platform you're watching, please comment to us. Please send us questions, because this is going to be a regular spot. We're going to talk about stuff and things on a regular basis, and we're gonna join the minds of TPS and TIRF together to bring you tips that make a difference. So with that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you very much. And Robin, thank you for taking time to spend with me here.
We'll do it again soon. John.
Awesome. Well, I will see you soon. Everybody, take care.